Okie dokie, everybody. We're just gonna do a little housekeeping, make sure everything is good, and then, and only then, will we get going. So just bear with me for a minute or two while we set all this up and make sure everything's launching, and then we will fully get going in just a second. Okay. Let's take a look. Okay, that's sounding good. All right, that's good. See if I can share this broadcast on ye old Twitter. And after we do that, we'll get going. Okay. All right. Almost there. Almost there. Okay, I think we are appropriately posted, which means I think that it is time to get going. All right, well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whoever you are. Technically speaking, wherever you are, I am, I guess, Dr. Patrick Lockwood. For the purpose of this podcast, I'm just Patrick, so please don't sue me or any of my affiliates and colleagues, etc. This is UnShrink Me, and this is a weekly podcast about mental health, psychiatry, psychology, everything in between related to mental health, so that consumers of mental health services, patients, their families, their loved ones, their friends, their spouses, etc., can have a database of information, of opinions and ideas and articles and content, etc., that allows you to make a more well-informed choice. That's it. That's the only reason this podcast even exists. My whole goal in being here is to create a more informed consumer base. So some of the things that I do every week in this podcast include debunking things and criticizing pop psychology nonsense online that we see all the time, and related kinds of things. Because the idea is that there's many well-intentioned people who believe garbage, who aren't really helping you with that garbage. There's also a small segment of the mental health profession who are cynical grifters, who believe they're especially smart, who believe they're especially perceptive or something, and they're really not. And so what I'd like to do is humanize the profession of clinical psychology and psychiatry, but I'd also like you to understand what is and what is not technically garbage. So that's the whole point of this, and I'm here to help. I'm here to answer questions, so come chat, join in, joke around. All is welcome. All are welcome here. So this is an inclusive podcast for everybody. No matter what you believe, what your profession, what your background, you are welcome. Come hang out and have fun. So without further delay, and we are, as always, not not formally sponsored by Celsius, but as I say every week, this stuff is great. It's probably killing me, but it's great. I love it. All right. So this week we have a lot to cover, as always, because there's always new stuff coming out. So many interesting topics today, but I'm probably not going to get to any of them or most of them, as always, because there's just so much to say. But this week, I want to start with this thing I posted earlier this week, because I was driving around and I'm just going to retweet it right now so everyone can see anything. If you're on Twitter, follow me at Dr. Lockwood. So let me just post this real quick, and then I'll discuss why I'm even sharing it, how it relates to mental health. Okay, so genuinely speaking, a lot of people care about kids and mental health, and that's good. I'm not a child psychologist, I'm not an educational psychologist, so I don't have a lot of professional experience or research-based knowledge on these things. I understand developmental psychology fairly well. I understand developing neuroscience fairly well, but what I'm not going to do is pretend that I know a bunch of stuff when I don't. So here's the tweet that I'm discussing. So earlier this week I said, I just drove past a middle school. The announcement board at this middle school said, and I quote, "Work hard, make friends, have fun." What do you all think? And a number of people chimed in and gave some interesting opinions. And I think most people had a very positive view of these three pieces of advice. If this is like a motto or something, right? So just to reiterate, the motto would be work hard, make friends, have fun. So here's what I can tell you as a clinical psychologist and why this might be a useful thing to think about for kids. So most young people, especially younger kids, do not have a sophisticated adult personality. Even if they're rather precocious or intelligent, it's very hard to distill a lot of the complicated adult dynamics, responsibilities, and needs for little kids. And little kids you have to talk to, generally speaking, somewhat differently. And so I like this. I agree, I think, with this phrasing as like, make sure you work hard, make sure you make friends, and make sure you have fun. Now, obviously, all three of those things can be interpreted all sorts of ways. Does work hard mean grind yourself to death and burn yourself out? Yeah, some people will take it that way. Does work hard mean do more than you're currently doing? It might mean that. So again, these are very broad platitudinous phrases, and so there's always the danger of interpretation. But generally for kids, it makes a lot of sense. Because some kids think school is all that matters, and that's not true at all. In fact, as important as primary education is and secondary education, and obviously as a professor, post-secondary education, these are all very important things, but a well-rounded person, a person who's mentally healthy, doesn't just work hard all day and make a bunch of money. And so I think it's a great idea that they're balancing out work hard with, its balance, right? Making friends and having fun, because it's 100% true that human beings across the entirety of the lifespan need healthy and effective relationships to survive and be well. In fact, one way of looking at mental health, not the only way, but one important way of looking at mental health is, do you have the appropriate kind of relationships and the appropriate amount of relationships? Because you might have a few good friends, but maybe not enough friends. You might have some good friends, but not an appropriate romantic partner. You might have a crappy romantic partner, but decent friends, etc. And so it's a combination of things, but you have to have connections to be healthy, to be robust to the challenges of life. Also, you have to have fun. The third thing they said is have fun. And I can tell you, as a clinical psychologist, 100%, many of my patients and their families who are miserable because they have ceded their entire lives to this overgeneralization, this identity that is their whole life is their illness, which is not healthy. And there's no field, there's no philosophy of clinical psychology that says only view yourself as your mental illness. That's a terrible way to live. And that's, I think, terrible for any human being to make yourself one thing. You're just gay, that's a terrible way to live. You're just straight, you're just a husband, you're just a lawyer, that's a terrible way to, whatever one identity piece you emphasize, that's a terrible way to live. Humans are complicated. And so if you forget to have fun, if you forget to engage in play across the lifespan, you will be more miserable than the average person. So personally, I really love this, and I'm glad they're teaching middle schoolers to work hard, to make friends, and to have fun. Because I think these are three important things that most adults, honestly, forget to do or do not prioritize. Some adults do not prioritize working hard in various domains of their life. They don't work hard on their physical health, or they don't work hard on their friendships, or they don't work hard on their romantic relationships, or they don't work hard making money, or whatever it is. And so if you don't work hard, if you do not invest the appropriate amount of energy and time into things, you will suffer in a way that you don't want to. Likewise, if you don't have fun, you will be miserable. And there's no rule that says just because you cross the magical barrier from 18 to 19 or 17 to 18, you're magically an adult, you have to be miserable and hustle and grind yourself to death. In fact, if you're the right kind of person, you might be able to work really hard and have fun doing it if you're built like that. So hats off to this middle school for listing work hard, make friends, and have fun. Just to start off on a positive note, because sometimes I don't start off super positive. So moving right along. Next. I am going to go to relationships. We were just talking about this. So Mark Manson, who I don't know at all, and I just started following, put out this post, which I think is worth discussing and talking about as it relates to it, because apparently he's a popular psychology writer. So I want to talk about this and maybe clarify some things he said. And I don't know Mark, so I'm just off the cuff saying these things. All right. So Mark Manson put out a tweet on 7/12, about 6 days ago. And here's what he said. He said, good relationships get better with work. Bad relationships need constant work just to stay the same. The trick is knowing which kind of relationship you're working on. So, apparently he is the guy who wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Whatever. And so that's a popular psych book about like having boundaries, telling people no, not caring what people think about you, whatever. And that's all fine. It's like useful for a lot of people because a lot of people do care too much about what other people think. So whatever. I'm not here to criticize that book. I haven't read it in full disclosure, so I'm not here to like make a statement about him or the book. But just know he is in the category of pop psychology, apparently not a clinical psychologist person, if I'm not mistaken. At least I don't think he is. He's just an author, I guess. But I don't know. Let's see. Who is he? Who is he? Yeah. I don't know who he is. So anyways, let's just get to what he said specifically. Good relationships get better with work. That's true. Bad relationships need constant work just to stay the same. Yes, kind of true. You can also you can invest very little energy, and that's part of why they're bad. He said the trick is knowing which kind of relationship you're working on. So let's break each of these three statements down. So yes, it's true to have a relationship, especially a family relationship, a colleague or work relationship or romantic relationship. For these types of important relationships to improve and get better, or even friendships, you have to put in some kind of effort. That's probably what he means by work. So it could be effort, it could be energy, it could be time, whatever, right? So effort is extremely important. And effort is a social signal that we all pay attention to, obviously, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. So he's correct that every important relationship requires some work. Now, the idea, the arbitrarily splitting relationships into good and bad is complete pseudoscience and bullshit. Because there is no such thing as a good relationship and there is no such thing as a bad relationship. These are such vague, trivial ways of describing things just to like get clicks, basically. Because he doesn't talk like a clinician. There's no licensed family therapist or couples therapist or whatever who would say good relationships and bad relationships. That's a guru way of talking. So please ignore that altogether. There is no perfect dichotomy. I mean, yeah, we all know what it's like to think our relationship is not very healthy for us. And maybe you'll call that a bad relationship, but just splitting it into a simple dichotomy doesn't really tell you how the relationship is functioning. And so to be even more technical about it, there are literally dozens of measures, like psychometrically valid measures you can use to assess couples and to assess families that have domains of family functioning and domains of couple functioning. Like one of the most validated measures of couple functioning is called the Marital Satisfaction Index, revised, the MSIR. And there are various domains within the MSIR data that are predictors of health of the relationship. And even on the more like couples therapy, pop psychology side of it, you've got, what do you have? You've got what it's called, the Gottmans. And I'm not saying they're bad. They probably help a lot of people. So I'm not trying to trash the Gottmans, just so we're clear. But like the Gottmans, they have their 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. If you're blaming and burnt out and cynical and passive aggressive all the time, all that stuff, like there are hallmarks, there are symptoms of relationships that are not functioning very well. But that's different than saying good versus bad. So I would ignore that altogether from Mark Manson, to be fair. So please don't fall into that trap of good versus bad, because it's all or nothing thinking. And all or nothing thinking doesn't really work in most human relationships because we're all very complicated. Our relationships are complicated. Maybe right now your relationship is really badly struggling. So like maybe you're dating someone and it's not going so well. You're in the middle of like a crisis or a rupture of some kind, and that happens and that's normal. Or it happens normally, let's say. The problem is that can you work through it? Because sometimes you can work through things. And so to call it all good or all bad just because you're having a problem right now, you can't really tell that, right? So it's really important, I think, to be very clear and specific when you're describing important relationships, family, friends, romantic partners, colleagues, whatever. But then let's go to the very last part of what he said, because I think this is where a lot of the gold lives. So the last part of what he said was the trick, I think is the exact phrase, the trick is knowing which kind of relationship you're working on. So in this particular case, I'm actually somewhat sympathetic to what he says. So although I don't like the dichotomy, the false dichotomy of good relationship, bad relationship, because it doesn't tell us anything useful or specific about what the relationship is actually like. We don't know. However, once you know how much your relationship is struggling and how well it's actually working for you, then you know what you're investing your time into, right? Because if you are able to look at all the domains of your relationship, communication, shared activities, shared interests, shared values, shared principles, etc., just to name 4 particular categories. Once you can assess those categories of how your relationship is functioning and have an informed understanding, an informed conversation with the other person in the relationship, you can start to assess how well is this relationship functioning. So it's a spectrum of functioning very well to not very well, right? Not good or bad. Once you can determine how well it's functioning and how workable it is because the person's giving either obvious signs that they're willing to work on it or they're sending implicit messages about their willingness to work, you can now make some informed decision about how much you want to invest. Because most of the time, most human beings have limited time, energy, and money. Most people do. And so because of that, we want to invest proportionally to what we see the other person's investment is, right? It's very important to have a proportional reciprocal relationship, right? So I do agree with him in that regard, if that makes sense. So I hope all that makes sense. I can always say more if you would like. All righty. Okay. Okie dokie. Let's take a look. What is next on the... all right. So there's a psychiatrist, I think, online that I'm going to tweet his post right now. Oh, more garbage from a person with a credential. So here we go. So there's a psychiatrist, I think, named Nick Fabiano. His handle is at NTFABIANO. He's in Ontario. And anyways, his post goes like this. You're not depressed. You just need a quest. I'm going to say it again. You are not depressed. You just need a quest. And then he posts a screenshot of a paper, which is linked below, that says, the paper says, a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. So this falls squarely into the category of like pseudoscience that's backed up by peer-reviewed papers, right? And this is of the category of like Jordan Peterson, self-help guru-esque things, which is superficially very tempting and interesting and potentially true to a very limited degree, but not genuinely true. So, again, just to reiterate what Nick said, Nicholas, whatever, what he said was, you're not depressed, you just need a quest. So a guru type person might spin that and say, well, of course your depression can be cured or managed by having a quest, because look at all the evidence-based therapies for depression, like ACT and CBT, or what's called behavioral activation. If you've never heard of this, this is part of my doing due diligence to inform the public thing. One of the evidence-based treatments for mild to moderate major depressive disorder is called behavioral activation. It's a specific type of behaviorism that helps incentivize you to start doing activities which are reinforcing, which will help you build up positive mood and momentum. That's a summary, not a factual description of what behavioral activation is, just so we're clear. So a guru type person, maybe like a Jordan Peterson or whatever, would say, well, exactly, because behavioral activation is so effective at helping people with depression, of course you need a quest, because every time you go garden, you're on a quest, and every time you go to the gym, you're on a quest, and every time you go on date night, you're on a quest. And it's like, yeah, but that's bullshit. Because like, yes, it's true that you're having this like very loosely defined quest-like experience, but it's not a dramatic journey to go garden more. Even if you're mentally ill, it's not a dramatic journey. So that's wild bullshit and horseshit. Please do not believe this metaphorical, archetypal nonsense. And the reason I say it this way is because I understand why it's appealing. There's an emotional appeal to think about it as a quest. But the problem is, I never want you ever having false hope. There's real hope, generally speaking, the realistic hope, and there's false hope. And it's absolute garbage to think of like tiny things you do as a quest. If you make it more big in your mind, you're actually less likely to do the thing, believe it or not. So that's the other reason I don't like this. Also, people struggling with major depressive disorder cannot just go on some magical quest and get better. That's not true. It's literally not true. There's no research that says that. Psychotherapy, medication, lifestyle change, exercise, all these things that can help people diagnosed with major depressive disorder are complicated and sometimes arduous and sometimes not, but it's not a quest. That's a terrible metaphor. It's like glorifying recovery from mental illness. And like, that's not okay. I understand that this can sound pessimistic, but that's not what I'm trying to say. But you shouldn't glorify a challenge. That's silly. And it also belittles the people that don't have the ability to think like that, because some people are so severely depressed that they can't even fathom think that way. Also, the people on the milder end of the depression spectrum who don't have a diagnosis like MDD, they're not depressed. They just have low mood that's situational, and you don't need a quest to cope better with your life. So that's just garbage. It's just absolute garbage. Oh, Nick, stop posting garbage. Just want to give a quick shout out to Sasha Ayad. So I don't know her at all. I've never met her or talked to her. Just going to post this real quick. So, quick shout out. So, Sasha Ayad posted something on 7/1, July 1st. So, it's a couple weeks late. Sorry, Sasha. She says, I am discussing the science of resilience against the backdrop of popular claims that have become more and more common in therapy culture, in quotes, and pop culture more broadly. Excuse me. So she says that difficult experiences get stored in the body, in quotes, which is garbage, in mysterious ways that we're not aware of. And that past experiences, both big and small, can have permanent, lasting, and deleterious impacts on our functioning. Also not technically true. These popular ideas about trauma have a bleak and fatalistic quality, she says, that can tell us that we're damaged, we don't know it. They can make us feel hypervigilant and broken. So in contrast to this popular but misinformed, in parentheses, trauma narrative, let's see what the science of resilience really tells us about how most people respond to very difficult and challenging experiences. Please read my latest piece. So, here's what I will tell you. I don't know Sasha, but I already love the vibe, because the vibe is there's the pop psychology version of this, which is not technically true in many cases. And it's more complicated than that, which sounds a lot like me. I love that. Now, I'm biased, obviously, but Sasha is out there crushing it. And I hope that you all, if you're on Twitter and if you're in the mental health world at all, go follow Sasha, subscribe to her Substack, help her get the word out about what trauma really is, what resilience really is. Because, so here's the deal, folks. It's abundantly clear from the research on PTSD and trauma that the vast majority of people on the planet will experience some kind of trauma while they're alive, at least one substantial trauma. But 85% or more of people will never develop symptoms of a disorder because of that, especially not PTSD. Only a tiny subset of people who experience trauma will actually develop PTSD and related disorders. And so, yes, trauma happens. And it can impact us, but it's not like a physical trauma that scars our body. That's an absurd way of looking at psychology in particular, because like I have some cuts on my arms right now because my cat scratched me. But like, is that technically trauma? Yes, technically, but I'm not going to my body's not going to have a drastic reaction, like a trauma reaction psychologically to the next time a cat scratches me, right? Because it heals, right? So when we are injured, that doesn't mean we have this lasting scar, but so many pop psychology nonsense authors have this belief system that like you're damaged forever, the body keeps the score, Bessel van der Kolk garbage. And it's not true. It's not. And it's based on flimsy neuroscience. But also there's all sorts of literature on the concept of resilience, which she goes over in her Substack post. So please, you are not fragile. And more importantly, you are not broken. This is something that patients really need to understand. Many people believe themselves to be broken, sometimes very explicitly. Like they say things like, I'm broken. but you're not. Because the concept of broken implies that you're a thing, right? So the way that I explain this to families when they want to send their kid to treatment is you have to find a way to overcome what I have coined, trademark this, the broken Rolex fallacy. So here's the deal. Many people who have a loved one with a mental illness or a serious drug problem believe that their loved one is broken. And then they treat them as such. And then the patient also might see themselves as broken. And so the problem with this is people aren't things. Things break, living creatures do not. Right? Humans are complicated and complex dynamic systems. We are not things. Yes, we have a physical body that can be damaged in some way, but we are not broken, right? It's impossible to be broken. That's not how it works. We are living, dynamic, evolving, changing systems. Whereas, like, in my view, a lot of families, many families and many patients believe in what I've coined as the broken Rolex fallacy, which is this idea that you're a thing that's broken that needs to be shipped off and fixed and polished up and sent back to your environment, which is absolute garbage, 100% garbage. Because the truth of the matter is you're not a thing, you're a person. And so people don't get fixed. People are complicated and complex dynamic systems, interdependent systems, interdependent on nature, on relationships and people and things. We are not a Rolex, right? That's why it's called the broken Rolex fallacy. If you think of your loved one who needs to go to rehab somewhere as broken and you want to ship them off to Switzerland, like if you've ever on Instagram, go to Instagram and then watch videos of people sending their broken Rolex to like Switzerland or whatever, and it gets repaired and put back together and shined up like brand new. And you have a 30-year-old watch that looks brand spanking new. And it's fascinating to watch. They take it all apart. There's the hundreds of parts and polish it and make it perfect again. That is what people think is going to happen when you ship your loved one off to therapy or rehab. They're broken. They're going to go get fixed. My very precious, valuable person, like my very precious and valuable watch, is going to get shipped off. The watch is going to Switzerland. The person's going to rehab in Malibu, and they're going to be fixed. And that's garbage. Because healing is a process. It's a journey that takes a long time in some cases. Learning new habits takes a long time. Learning coping skills. But more importantly, learning how to show up differently in relationships takes a lot of practice. Even with the best therapists and the best medications, your ability to manage your life better in relationships, in challenging environments, takes a lot of practice. You can't just get shipped off to somewhere in Rehabistan, learn some coping skills, do some seeking safety, and come out better with your trauma and your addiction and go back to your terrible high-stress job, your difficult relationship with your kids and stuff, and be fine after 30 days or something. That's garbage. Because people are complicated. Their circumstances are complicated. Their environments are complicated. And so learning these skills and these insights, learning to just tolerate your feelings. If you crawled into a bottle of booze 25 years ago and your brain has been pickled and your brain has been sedated by alcohol, your GABA system, your opiate system, your dopamine system, your glutamate system have all been hijacked by 2.5 decades of drinking. Learning to tolerate anxiety again, learning to tolerate anger again is going to be nearly impossible in a month. There's no way you're going to go shipped off to some fancy rehab for 30 days or even 90 days and be magically better and able to tolerate your feelings and function better. That's crap. Just like a person with serious bipolar is not going to learn some coping skills and do a little bit of family therapy and they'll just be fine. People with severe mental health problems need lots of support that usually tapers off in intensity over time. So this broken Rolex fallacy is everywhere in psychiatry. It's everywhere in pop psychology garbage. You fix yourself, fix your habits. That's crap. It takes time. People are not things you can fix. People are complicated, dynamic systems that require support, monitoring, feedback, guidance, encouragement, understanding, correction, accountability, and that you can't do in 30 days. You can't ship them off like you ship off your Rolex. So I hope you all see Willow back there. She's amazing. She's best part of this podcast, obviously. Look at this. Look at this face. Look at this face. Anyways, so where this rant started is trauma and resilience. And again, huge shout out to people like Sasha. Dear Sasha Ayad, if you ever want to come on the podcast, you are welcome. You are in the crew. You're part of the crew because you're trying to debunk the pop psychology nonsense out in the world. And there's too much of it that hurts people or at least doesn't help people. Okay. All right, speaking of what I just said, I'm going to criticize this real quick. So there's a person named Kimia Nora who just posts a bunch of pop psychology nonsense all the time on Twitter. So if you follow her, God bless you. Okay, let's see. Almost there. Here we go. So Kimia Nora, her handle is at IamKimIanora. I am Kimia Nora. She posted this on 7/12. It's absolute garbage. She said, your personality is just a set of habits. Change the habits and you change your entire identity in 90 days. So there's literally 3 different lies in this very short 2-sentence post. So number 1, she said, your personality is just a set of habits. No, that's not true. You can read any personality theorist since the 19 teens and everyone will tell you, technically, literally, that is not true. So no, Kimia, you're incorrect. Number 2, she said, change the habits, change your entire identity in 90 days. Okay, so there's 2 lies in that sentence, 2 falsehoods, literally. So number 1, the idea that you can just change your habits to change your entire identity is absolute horseshit. The truth of the matter is, many of your personality traits are on the more flexible or context dependent side of things, which are different qualifiers. But some of your personality traits are very stable. So like the 5-factor model, I always come back to the big 5. The big 5 is very stable over time. I've retweeted, I don't know how many posts about that on Twitter. I did a video on personality here as well years ago. So like most of your personality traits are fairly stable over time. If you score at the 80th percentile of trait narcissism, you're probably going to stay around the 80th percentile, even with very good therapy to help you with your narcissism. It might decrease a little bit, but you're not going to go from the 80th to the 20th percentile. If you score at the 10th percentile of trait extroversion, which means you're very shy temperamentally, you're not going to magically become an extrovert with a psychedelic trip or some shit like that. It's not going to happen. So, lie number 2 is you're going to change your entire identity, which is absolute horseshit. Number 3 lie is in 90 days. It's such horseshit that you can change a very enduring thing about yourself in 90 days, especially if it's a personality trait. If you're just trying to change one habit, you might be able to make substantial progress in learning a new or replacement habit for a less adaptive habit in 90 days. That's true. But the idea that you're going to change your entire personality in 90 days is 100% garbage. So the 90 days thing, garbage. Entire identity, garbage. Your personality is just a set of habits. Garbage. Please ignore people like this because they don't know what they're talking about and they're just trying to get clicks, and God help us all. All right. Comment here. So I'm just going to take a quick break and address this comment. So Subplantant says, I think of myself as broken in comparison to who I was for my first 40 years of life. I practiced, in quotes, being able to do stuff for 40 years, and I gradually lost the ability. That feels like being broken. Well, that's really tough. And so at the risk of, I'm not here to do therapy with you or be a coach or a guru or anything. So please, if you need professional help, please go seek it out, right? Because that's not the purpose of this podcast. The purpose of this podcast is just to provide information and perspective. So it's possible, Subplantant, I think is, if I'm saying it correctly, it's certainly possible that people think of themselves as broken and that becomes their reality. And I don't encourage that with my patients and their families and their loved ones, etc. I don't think that's productive, number one. And number two, I don't believe that it's technically true. Because broken implies there's a simple thing you're going to change to fix yourself. When in reality, most human psychology is complicated and has to do with not only your biology, but also the context of your suffering. So if you have, for instance, major depressive disorder, you might have low mood and suicidal ideation as part of MDD. And that happens not all day, every day, but it happens contextually. Because sometimes your low mood is worse in the morning, but not at night or in the middle of the day, etc. And so it's very important to be clear about the specific types of symptoms you have and the type of suffering you're experiencing, because it's not as simple as I need to fix this one thing or fix this one habit like I was just talking about. It's actually extremely important to look at the context of your symptoms, when they started, what other factors happen in your life, like metabolic factors like your blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, or blood sugar, or hormones, which is why I tell all my patients to go see their physician to get their blood drawn to make sure they're metabolically okay and their hormones are okay. Because sometimes your mood-related issues have to do with your physical health. Often there's a correlation. So people are complicated is the short version of what I was just saying. And so what I would say is, because you are so complicated like the rest of us, I sincerely hope that if you need professional help, you seek it out and you take yourself as seriously as possible, and you have the grace that you deserve, and you give yourself grace, and you see yourself as a complicated, dynamic, interdependent person like the rest of us. And because of that, I don't think the mechanistic view of a person, like their brain's a computer that's broken, I don't think that makes sense, because that completely strips context and people and relationships and biology out of the picture altogether. So if that's how you feel, I understand, and I'm not here to try to convince you or therapize you. I just hope that you have the support you need and you find whatever help you think you need in order to kind of look at these things that might have made it hard to function for the first 40 years of your life, as you said. And I appreciate you commenting, because, it's a lot of people I've met in my career in the last 15 years who've said similar things, where it's like, I felt broken since I was 6. I felt broken since I hit puberty. A lot of people feel broken for their mental illness, right? So I've worked with a number of young people with gender dysphoria, and they feel like they are broken because their gender identity, how they feel about themselves, does not match what their body looks like and physically feels like. And so a lot of different people with lots of mental illnesses, PTSD, major depressive disorder, personality disorders, feel broken because they think something is fundamentally wrong with themselves. And that, I don't believe, is technically true. I don't think it's a useful way of looking at people. I don't think it's pragmatically useful. And I don't think it fully tells the story of what a human psychology is, all the good and the bad of a person, the struggle and the success, the positive traits and the traits that aren't so helpful, and most importantly to me, the contextual nature of psychological functioning. Because although we are fairly similar across time and space, because traits don't change that much, like I just said, generally speaking, we're not exactly the same exact person at the gym as we are at home, having sex, going for a run, laughing with our friends, whatever. Like, we're all kind of different depending upon context. Context matters for mental health. That's why, like, newer modalities like ACT matter a great deal. ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And so, Subplantant, I hope that you find a way to get what you need out of this experience, because there's help for people who feel broken. I don't know what that would look like in your case. I'm not here to therapize you. I hope you get what you need and you find the help you need if you need it. And if you feel like you need more support, feel free to DM me or send a message here or DM me on Twitter. My handle is @Dr. Lockwood, and I can try to help you find mental health support in your area if you want. This podcast is not mental health advice, and I'm not here doing therapy with anybody. This is just information for the public. That's it. So thank you for sharing, by the way. I am going to do, I think, one more, and then we will wrap up for the day. There's a lot to say, to be fair. Uh, Okay, let's end with this, because I think this is something that is important for everyone, as like a just so you know, heads up. So there's different modalities in psychotherapy and psychiatry. So obviously there's prescribing medications, there's cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, there's psychodynamic types of therapy, and then one of the newer versions of cognitive therapy is called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. So it's not supposed to be ACT, it's supposed to be ACT, whatever. Anyways, so one of the founders of ACT is a guy named Stephen Hayes, and he posted this thing 3 days ago, which I'd like to just share again and talk about to wrap up today's podcast. Okay. So, again, Stephen Hayes, clinical psychologist, helped create ACT. And he's been around for a long time, so he kind of knows a lot of different modalities and has lots of experience. So, here's what he said. Here's his post. 3 days ago, he said this. The aim isn't to avoid pain or discomfort, but to live in a way that is more fulfilling and aligned with your values. And then under that, he has a picture, a screenshot of a post, which is the goal is not to feel better, but to live better. So it's kind of two different ways of saying the same thing, but I want to break this down for everyone, because I think, ACT being a newer type of therapy, newer, it's not new, but it's newer, doesn't have the same name recognition as some of the older ones like CBT or DBT, etc. So the great thing about ACT is it definitely places an emphasis on values. So all human beings from all cultures have different types of values. So for instance, I'll just use myself as the easy example. I have essentially 5 core values that I use to run my businesses and to guide my life if I can. So the number one value in my life is grace, right? That there is wiggle room and an understanding that the things are different and messy and complex and complicated and contextual. So like my gut reaction should involve some kind of grace, because maybe I'm not seeing the whole thing. Maybe there's something I'm missing. I don't know. So let's have some grace for people, right? Grace doesn't mean you automatically enable them or something. It just means let's be cautious. Let's be patient and not automatically jump to the damnation conclusion. Because like I certainly deserve it, so let me give other people a break. So grace. Another one of my values is humor. I try to be funny because I think being funny is generally useful, right? Another value of mine is knowledge. What do I know and what don't I know, right? Another value I have is integrity. Am I keeping my word across time and space? Am I consistent in showing up in the way that I agreed to show up? Right? So am I consistently living these 5 values, for instance? Right? And then a final value of mine is clarity. Am I showing up in a way where everything makes sense? Am I speaking in a way that's clear and makes sense? Is my behavior consistent and clear? Does my behavior consistently signify what I'm trying to sell or show? Right? Because if you're not clear, then you can't really be consistent and people don't really know what to do with you. Right? So those are my 5 values. And so basically what Stephen Hayes is saying is the goal is not to feel better, but to live better. So what does it mean to live better? Because that's a very vague pop psychology guru sounding sentence. So that's why his original post is so important. His original post was, the aim is not to avoid pain or discomfort, but to live in a way that is more fulfilling and aligned with your values. So part 1 is a negative injunction. Do not avoid pain or discomfort. And the reason that makes sense from a therapy perspective is because most of the time our habits and our behaviors that are aimed at avoiding bad feelings make us feel worse and keep the problem recalcitrant. They keep us stuck. So that makes sense. But then the question is, what do we do as opposed to avoiding pain? Well, we live in a way that is in alignment with our values, right? So if you live more in alignment with your values, it should naturally be more fulfilling. So if you value honesty, and that's one of your top 5 values. So like integrity is kind of another way of saying honesty. You keep your word. You be your word. You tell the truth. You do what you're going to say, etc. You walk the talk. So if you really value honesty, generally speaking, you will feel better even though there will be problems, right? Telling the truth is a messy thing to do. You know, because if you tell the truth, people may not like what you're saying, right? This whole podcast is predicated on trying to be honest about what we can and cannot know about various topics in psychology, psychiatry, etc. And so some people really appreciate this because I'm doing what I can to tell the truth. And so those people will give me positive validation and support me. But some people will absolutely hate this podcast because what I'm trying to do is poke a hole in their guru-sized egos or their bullshit industry to get attention and clicks and likes. And so they'll vilify me. And that doesn't matter because I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm trying to be a person of integrity and be honest about what we can and cannot know, right? So because I'm living more in alignment with the values, I'm okay with the haters and the people who don't like me. If you want to cancel me for something I said, God bless. Feel free. I've been waiting to get canceled ever since I've been on Twitter, and I'm still waiting. The crickets are sounding. Where's the cancellation? Come get me. I don't care because I'm trying to tell the truth. So fuck it. Who cares? And so living in alignment with your values is actually protective against the BS that comes your way from the natural consequences. Sometimes the natural consequences are healthy and useful, and sometimes the natural consequences are absolute garbage. And whether or not the natural consequences are good or bad or useful or not useful, if you're living more in alignment with your values, then you can feel justified in your behavior that allows you to feel emotionally grounded despite the stress that's coming your way, right? So values aligned behavior appear to be resilience inducing from the point of view of ACT, if that makes sense. So to me, that's exactly why, by the way, it's super important to be clear about your values and try to live in alignment with them. So I definitely agree with people like Stephen Hayes and all the people who like ACT because there's really nothing we can do to avoid pain. The question really is, what kind of pain would we prefer to have? And how would we prefer to manage the pain, right? So like, there's no such thing as a perfect relationship. Relationship pain is going to happen. You're going to have a fight. You're going to have a disagreement. You're going to go through a rupture. You're going to feel bad. You're going to say something stupid like I do all the time. And you're going to figure it out. You're going to do it better. And so do you want the pain of figuring out how to do it better? Or do you want the pain of constant misery from not evaluating what you could do better? Which pain would you prefer? Right? That, I think, is the real value of modalities like ACT for people with major depressive disorder, PTSD, anxiety disorders, and the like, even substance use disorders, because there's some literature for that too. So I think ACT is very helpful. Thank you, Stephen Hayes, for giving me something to riff off of, because I do value you and what you do. All right, I think that's going to be the show for today. And thank you, Subplantant, for coming to chat and share your experience. It's appreciated. Again, this is not therapy. Subplantant says, thank you so much, Patrick. That was incredibly helpful. Well, you're welcome. That's why I do this. I want to help if I can, but not as your therapist or anything. So thank you all for coming out and listening to my rambling and criticizing and explaining and all this stuff. I hope this was helpful. And if you found it helpful, please like, share, and subscribe. Please try to share the word with more people. I'm genuinely here to help. I'm genuinely here to help create, because I'm not the only one. There's lots of great podcasters who are trying to help create a more informed consumer base, because there are many millions of people the world over who have serious mental health problems, who need professional support. And so I want to make sure that the people who are seeking out professional support do not get hurt by their providers. Also, I want to make sure that the people who are seeking out professional support get the help that they need. They can feel encouraged and empowered to ask good questions, assert themselves in their professional relationship, and show up for themselves in a way that's useful and gets what they need out of therapy, out of psychiatry, etc. So please like, share, and subscribe. Help me get the word out so we can help more people take more advantage of the services and the people that are trying to help them get more out of their clinical work. That's the whole goal. Because basically that will help with recidivism. It'll help with people not needing therapy for 10 years or coming back 5 years later or whatever it is. What if we could save more time and money? How awesome would that be? By just getting more out of your current psychiatry or more out of your current therapy services, right? So that's the spirit of this UnShrink Me podcast. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, I like to end with some terrible dad joke if I can. So here's my crack at one this week. So once upon a time, I worked with a lawyer, smart guy. And this lawyer, so if you don't know, there's different types of obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD. So there's all sorts of interesting variations of OCD. There's even like a pure O OCD where all you have is obsessions, supposedly. So this lawyer, like mid-50s, Latin dude, very successful here in LA. This dude had what we called homosexual OCD or homo OCDs. This is a specific type of OCD where you have this obsession, this intrusive and powerful and distressing set of thoughts that you are genuinely homosexual and should be attracted to the same sex, even though you're technically not. So this guy is married for 30 years, multiple kids, successful lawyer career, has a great wife, etc., but has secretly dealt with homosexual OCD his entire life. So anyways, at the point at which I'm working with him, trying to help him, etc., with his homosexual OCD, he's remodeling his house, which is very stressful, as you can imagine. And as he's remodeling his house, they're going through all the rooms, the bathroom, all the bedrooms, etc. And like one day in the middle of the remodel, they're redoing one of the guest bedrooms in his house. And he walks into the closet and he gets stuck in the closet. He's literally trapped in the closet. Now think about this. He's got homosexual OCD, which he's told nobody about. Not his wife, not his colleagues, not his kids, nobody. And now he's physically trapped in the closet because the doorknob wasn't connected right for this remodel or whatever. He finally gets out. He has to break the door, which is not fun, etc., costs money. But he gets out and he yells at the contractor. And he comes back to therapy the next week, very distressed, extremely distressed. He's like, "You will never guess what happened to me." I said, "Tell me what happened." And he looks at me and says, "Doc, I was trapped in the closet this week in my house because the door handle broke, etc., etc." He tells me the whole story. It's crazy. It's wild. And I just couldn't help myself, as is often the case. I said, I looked at him and I said, "Well, what's it like to come out of the closet?" All right. Have a good week. Take good care of yourself. Eat good food. Have good sex. Do good things. Be good to people. Be good to yourself. And I'll see you next week. Bye.